early, so if you are still eating, just go ahead, keep eating. So it is my pleasure, so welcome to day 2 of the conference. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Miriam Sherin, our featured plenary speaker for today. Miriam Sherin is Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education at Northwestern University and the Alice Gabriel Twite Professor of Learning Sciences and the School of Education and Social Policy. Dr. Sherin's research seeks to improve our understanding of how teachers learn to notice, and this is going to be short. Without further ado, here's Dr. Sherin.
Thanks so much. I'm Miriam Sherin. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to thank Scott and Carl and Miriam and Joanne for organizing this whole conference and for inviting me to be here today. I'm going to talk about mathematics teacher noticing, how it started, how it's going, and what's next. And several colleagues of mine contributed to this presentation and our paper today, including Jen Richards, Bruce Sherin, Elizabeth Van Ness, and Sarah Larison, who I'm delighted is here with us today. So the big questions I want to ask are on the next slide. Okay. The big questions I want to talk about today are: what is teacher noticing? What are the boundaries of teacher noticing? And how should we think about the role of video in teacher noticing? And I want to do this by exploring the evolution of research on mathematics teacher noticing. And before we get too deep into these questions, I thought we would start by doing some noticing activities together. So I'm going to flash a sentence on the screen for about 5 seconds, and I'm going to ask you to count the number of F's, the letter F. Okay? Here we go. Okay, how many people saw at least one F? Well done. 2, 3, 4, 5? More than 5? Okay, so we all know what the letter F looks like, right? So it's a little strange that we're seeing different. So let's try it again. Ready? Here you go. Okay, how many saw at least 1, 2, 3, 4? A few more people saw 4, 5, 6? More than 6? That's good, because there's 6. Okay, let's read them together. Ready? The first F is in. And then? And then? Oh. And then? And then? Scientific. Very good. And one more? And that makes 6. Right? Okay, and I want to thank Chris Bean at the University of Cape Town for this great activity. So what's the point here? We can all look at the same thing, but we may not see the same thing. Even though I think we'd all agree that there are 6 F's in the paragraph, seeing, noticing is an active process. It involves constructing meaning from what we observe. Okay, let's do another activity. In this activity, you are going to watch a basketball game, and there's going to be 2 teams. Some teams have white t-shirts and some teams have black t-shirts. And I'm going to ask you to count the number of passes the white team, the team with the white t-shirts, makes. So you're going to count the number of passes. And I have learned that there are 2 kinds of passes. There is a chest pass, where it goes directly to the other person, and there's a bounce pass, where the basketball is bounced. Some of you may see this before, and so you will obviously want to let other people enjoy this activity. Okay? So you're going to count the number of F's. Thank you. That's funny. Count the number of passes. Okay. Shout outs. About how many passes did you see? 16? Anybody more? 29? How many less? Okay. So a range of numbers. Did anyone see anything unusual? Yes. What did you see? A gorilla. Did anyone not see a gorilla? Would anyone be very surprised to hear there was a gorilla there? Okay, let's watch it again. Ready? And here you are, very carefully counting the number of passes. Another pass, another pass, another pass. And yeah, sort of shocking. Now, how many of you have seen this video before? A lot of you. Did you notice that one of the players wearing the black t-shirts left in the middle? Did you notice that the screen, the screen behind changed colors from red to orange? Yeah. So there's a lot going on here. So again, what's the point? Our expectations drive what we perceive. We would never expect to see a gorilla in the middle of a basketball game. And of course, I told you to focus on the number of passes, right? Perception, noticing is this really interesting thing. It's driven in part by our sense of what we anticipate going on. Okay, next noticing activity, I need a volunteer. This is where we need the microphone to read this aloud. Someone willing to read this aloud? There, we've got a volunteer. Thank you so much, and here's a microphone. It's not on.
Where is the person?
Right over there.
Oh, do you want me to stand up?
Yeah.
Cool. According to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess and you can still read it without a problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we can make sense of things even when we don't have all the details, as in this example. And I think that's because we focus our attention in particular ways. Oops. So noticing involves both broadening and narrowing our focus. We already talked about broadening, right? Being open to seeing things that might not initially be obvious. But noticing also involves narrowing our focus sometimes, not paying attention to everything, but picking and choosing what we pay attention to and how we focus on what we think is key. Okay, now we're gonna move into noticing in the context of some classroom. And I wanna talk about an activity that took place in a kindergarten math class. And I'm gonna ask you to think for a moment about what you think some kindergartners might say if they were asked if the following four equations were true or false. And it's wonderful that we're at these nice round tables, so I'm gonna ask you to talk at your table or with the person next to you. What do you think kindergartners would say? So take a minute and go ahead and talk. I know I didn't give you too much time, but I hope you got started in thinking. The good news is now that we're actually going to watch some kindergartners discussing this. In the video we're going to watch, we're just going to watch their discussion of the middle two equations in this orange box here. They've already talked about the first equation, 7 equals 2 plus 5, and in fact there were some mixed views about whether this is true or false, and one student said, 2 2 plus 5 equals 7 would be the regular equation. So that happened just before this, and now the teacher's going to show them 2 plus 5 equals 5 plus 2, and she's going to say, tell me, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Now, on your table, there's a few transcripts if you are a kind of person that wants to follow along with the transcript. Also, for those of you who have the wonderful conference app, if you open the app to this session, there is also an attachment there, so you can have your own personal electronic version. Okay, and the video is about 4 minutes long.
You're thinking, is this true or false? Soren, what do you think? True or false?
True.
Why?
Because 2 plus 5 equals 7, and 5 plus 2 equals 7. Although 5 plus 2 is just reverse of 2 plus 5.
So this side is just the reverse of this side.
Yeah.
And you're saying that 2 plus 5 equals 7, and 5 plus 2 equals 7, so this is true?
Yeah.
Well, raise your hand. What other ideas do we have? I like your thinking, Soren. What else? Who can add on? Or maybe someone disagrees? Alana, what do you think? True or false? It's okay. What do you think?
I think it's true because in the last one, it was the same thing as the first 2, so 5 equals 7, and 5 and 2.
It's the same. Mason, do you have something to add on your reasoning?
Well, if you just put the wall on.
Tell me more about the wall.
It's because, well, they're both 7, but it's actually kind of wrong because the 5, it should be, the 2 should be there and then the 5 should be there.
What, this 2 should be where? On this side?
Yeah.
And then this 5 should be here. So do you think this is true? Does 2 plus 5 equal 5 plus 2? You do?
I was going to say
What? You were going to say false first, but now you changed your thinking.
yeah, me too.
You too? Okay, other ideas. Michael, what do you think? True or false?
True.
Why?
The safety is stored.
You agree with Soren? Does anyone think this is false? Liliana, you think this is false?
Because there's 2 5 and 2 2, and the minus is in the middle, and the minus is back to the
The equal sign?
Yeah.
So this is false because the equal sign should be over here.
And there's 2 plus.
And there's 2 pluses, so this is false. Matthew, what do you think?
True.
True. You agree? Okay.
If this one was gone, then it would be true.
Okay. Alright, watch what I'm going to do. You ready? Watch this. I'm going to change one thing, and then I want you to think if it's still true or false. Okay? I want you to raise your hand. Now it says 2 plus 5 equals 5 minus 2. Raise your hand. Is this true or false? Oh, how nicely some people are saying it's so respectful. 5 hands. Is this true or false? Alana, what do you think?
I think it's false because that one's a minus and the minus.
Okay,
That one's plus.
so this one says plus and this one says minus, so they're not true. This is not true. Camelia, what do you think? Tell me more. So 2 plus 5, this side equals what?
7.
So this side equals 7, and what does this side equal? How do you know?
Because I know that 2 plus 3 is equal 5.
So this side equals 7, and this side equals 3. Are they the same?
No.
Devin, you agree with Camelia? Yeah? Mason, do you have any thoughts? What are you thinking? True or false? What do you think? True or false? Soren, what do you think? Extra false. You're like 100% sure this is false. Why?
Because, if you like, since you erase the plus and minus them, 5 minus 2 equals 3, and 2 equals 5 equals 7, so it's false.
It's false. Does anyone think it's true?
Okay. So now I'm going to ask you to take a few minutes, again at your table, and let's think about our noticing. So what ideas about equality did the students share? How did the students explain or justify their ideas? And what questions do you have about the students' understandings? So take a few minutes. Okay, I know I haven't given you too long, but as I walked around a bit, I heard a few different ideas. Perhaps you talked about when Soren said 2 plus 5 equals 7 and 5 plus 2 equals 7. Or maybe you wondered what Mason meant when he said the wall. Maybe you had an idea about what Liliana meant when she said there can't be two pluses. We were just talking about that over here, that maybe she thinks there's something wrong with the structure of an equation with two pluses. Or maybe you were thinking about whether Camilia's argument that one side was 7 and one side was 3 and one side was 7 was the same or different as Soren's earlier argument. Now, of course, I asked you to think about the students' ideas about equality, but you could, of course, focused on other things. Maybe you were thinking about who spoke in the class and why the teacher called on the same students several times. Why did the teacher only tell one student that she liked his thinking? And maybe you wondered why the teacher sometimes asked students to raise their hand and other times didn't ask students to raise their hand. So even though it's a short video, there's a lot that you might notice. Now I want to just shift gears a little bit and think about the teachers noticing. So what do you think the teacher noticed as she was teaching? What evidence is there in the video of the teacher noticing? So I'm trying to think about, what does teacher noticing look like? Again, take a few minutes to talk. Okay, well, I just heard some really interesting discussions. Some of the points that I heard were that we might make claims about a teacher noticing when she is taking action, when she is responding to students or rephrasing students' ideas. Then we had a little discussion about that the teacher might be noticing a little differently when she says, does anyone disagree? It's sort of at a broader time scale. She's getting agree, 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 and so she feels like, okay, it's time to say, does anyone disagree? She might also be noticing in a particular way when she asks a certain student why, to explain something. When she writes on the board, right, that's an indication that she's attending to something. When she moves on to the next equation, what kind of noticing has she been doing that cues her in that she wants to move on? We also talked at this last table here about the idea that she's probably noticing things and not taking action, and it's hard to make claims about that. So this is really what I want to focus on today, which is what is teacher noticing? And I want to start by trying to answer these questions by looking at theoretical perspectives on teacher noticing. Now, research on teacher noticing is not immune to the changing theoretical perspectives on teacher learning more generally. So in the early 1980s, when researchers first started to explore the idea of teacher noticing, it was from the cognitive perspective, right? This was the perspective that was popular at the time for thinking about teacher learning more broadly. And the idea was that teacher noticing was a set of specialized cognitive processes, that teachers are selective in what they attend to, right? There's a lot going on in a classroom. A teacher can't notice everything with the equal weight, so they make choices about where, what, and to notice. And this involves teachers identifying important moments of instruction to focus their attention on. And some of the earliest work comes from John Mason, David Berliner, Fred Erickson, and others. Now, over the last couple of decades, increasing attention has been paid to a sociocultural approach to teacher learning. And again, this is reflected in research on teacher noticing. So this perspective emphasizes that what a teacher does and does not notice is shaped by cultural forces, right? That teacher noticing is a activity that's situated within a larger systems and discourses in which teaching and learning take place. So when we study teacher noticing, we should consider the broader framings in which this noticing takes place. And a number of colleagues emphasize that this is particularly important in our efforts to help teachers develop noticing practices that promote equitable mathematics learning. Now, I think it is certainly a good idea to think of teacher noticing as socially and culturally situated, right? It seems certain that a teacher's noticing will be dependent on aspects of their past histories and their cultural and ideological backgrounds. And I say this as someone who has spent pretty much her entire career studying teacher noticing from a cognitive perspective. So I think this is a very important and valuable approach. But I do have a question. My question is this: what does this shift mean for how we should think about teacher noticing, and in particular for how we should theorize teacher noticing? So we have this cognitive, one perspective is that we have this cognitive process that is noticing. Is it sufficient to think of the social and cultural as inputs into this cognitive process? Inputs that influence teacher noticing, right? So we keep noticing as cognitive, we have these new social and cultural inputs that influence it. That's sort of one approach. And that would suggest, I think, that we can continue with the same kind of theorizing that we've been doing. But maybe that's not right. Maybe we need to think of teacher noticing differently, as something that the teacher and class and context and histories do together. And it might be that this second approach helps us understand teacher noticing in ways that we think are important and useful. Or it might be that taking up this second approach of noticing as something that the teacher and class do together makes us wonder if teacher noticing is a useful construct. For me, the question is, does this shift to the second approach require a fundamental rethinking of what teacher noticing is? And I find it helpful to go back to the kindergarten lesson to think about this a bit. So if we think of teacher noticing as a cognitive process, then we might say that Mrs. Fields is on the lookout for what she thinks of as interesting student ideas about equality, right? So when Mason mentions the wall, that's something she hasn't heard before, it doesn't fit her expectations, and she follows up with him. She says, "Tell me about the wall." If, however, we take the perspective that noticing is something that the teacher and the class do together, then the fact that Mrs. Fields reacts to Mason commenting on the wall is sort of subtly dependent on what's going on in the context. Mason's tone of voice, his position in the classroom, what happened earlier in the day, what happened earlier in the week, what other ideas came up at other times. And so again, my question is teacher noticing defined in this way still useful for us? Let's go on. A second and related question relates to the boundaries of teacher noticing. So initial conceptions of teacher noticing emphasize these two processes, selective attention or attending, again the idea that teachers have to choose where to pay attention, and knowledge-based reasoning or interpreting. Again, the idea that noticing involves teachers using their knowledge and experience to make sense of what they observe. Now, a widely accepted expansion to this idea was introduced by Vicki Jacobs and colleagues with the idea of deciding to respond. And Jacobs and her colleagues argued that attending, interpreting, and deciding to respond are really temporally linked, right? They happen almost simultaneously, so it was important to include. And in 2021, two additional components were introduced. Building on studies that look at the relationship between framing and noticing, Nicole Louie and colleagues chose to locate framing within noticing. And their point was to emphasize that socio-political frames are intimately bound up with attending, interpreting, and responding in the moment. And then Beth Van Ness and I also introduced a new component, what we call shaping. And this involves teachers constructing interactions in the midst of noticing to gain additional information that can further support their noticing. Now, I think these different components of noticing can help us draw attention to key purposes and aspects of the work that teachers do when they notice classroom events. So when we include deciding to respond, for example, it emphasizes sort of the purposeful nature of noticing, what Fred Erickson calls instrumental. And I think including framing as part of noticing really promotes attention to the broader context in which teachers and classrooms operate. So not just in studies that choose to focus on framing, but in all studies of teacher noticing. And I think these are really important ideas to consider. But I think these components make it challenging to know where teacher noticing starts and stops. And I sort of worry that we're headed down a slippery slope in which many acts of teaching fall under the umbrella of teacher noticing. And I want to illustrate this a bit more by talking about shaping. And remember, I'm the one who introduced shaping, so I'm part of the problem here. Beth and I got this idea of shaping from our work with video clubs, where teachers watch and discuss excerpts of their teaching. And we've written a lot about how teachers develop their noticing abilities, their attention and interpreting skills in the context of video clubs. But we also found that over time, teachers became more interested in the video. So sometimes they would be working to try to understand something a student is saying, and they would say, "Did she say 5? Can we watch the video again?" Or they might be trying to understand if a student is saying this thing or this other thing, and they would say, "Is there more video? Is there something else we can watch?" They're sort of looking for more evidence to support their noticing. And Beth and I thought this was really interesting, so we turned to our classroom data and we said, is this thing happening in the classroom? And we found something very similar, not exactly the same, but something similar where teachers were seeking more information to further their noticing during instruction. So for example, when Mrs. Fields asked Mason, "Tell me about the wall," that's the kind of thing that we would characterize as shaping. She heard Mason say something about the wall, and she wants to learn more. She wants to notice more, be able to notice more about this idea. So she prompts the student with a question. But I wonder, is shaping just teaching? Is it helpful to think of shaping as part of noticing, as connected to noticing? Or should we be thinking of shaping as entangled with, but separate from noticing? And again, I don't think teacher noticing can be as useful a construct if everything is teacher noticing. And again, this is a dilemma that I'm struggling with, and that I think it's really worth the field struggling with as well. Okay. Finally, I want to consider the role of video in supporting teacher noticing. Since the 1970s, when video cameras became smaller than a refrigerator, literally, video has been used for recording classrooms. And in the 1990s, I introduced the idea that video was particularly well suited to help teachers learn to notice. And many people have explored this idea with much success. There have been studies that have looked at the design of video-based programs and tools, how to situate video productively and work with teachers, how we can facilitate productive video-based discussions. And all of this interesting work has been in the service of helping teachers learn to notice, and much of it has been particularly around helping teachers to notice student mathematical thinking. And the typical approaches have been that a researcher or a teacher educator goes into a classroom and records a lesson, and then that same researcher or teacher educator selects excerpts of video for viewing. And this approach has been based on the idea that learning to notice happens within the review and discussion of video. That's sort of the approach that we've taken for decades. Now, more recently, advances in video technology have really provided increased opportunities for teacher self-captured video. And we and others have been exploring how doing so promotes new opportunities for learning to notice. So for example, as teachers plan to capture video, they've been engaging in a kind of anticipatory noticing where they're thinking, okay, where am I going to see something interesting? Where am I going to be looking for student thinking in this lesson? And even while teaching, during video capture, teachers are also engaged in noticing. We have seen teachers tell us afterwards that during a lesson, they decide to slow down a conversation or extend a conversation so there could be more to notice. And as teachers review video, they're also engaging in important noticing practices. So let's take a look at Mrs. Fields. So Mrs. Fields was part of a course with other teachers on math argumentation. And as part of the course, teachers would record themselves. They would select an excerpt of video to share with peers. And I'm not expecting you to read this whole thing, but the entire true-false lesson that Ms. Fields recorded was actually about 15 minutes. And that's what this colored bar showed. The purple shows when there was whole class discussion, the orange shows when there was teacher direction, etc. And so what we did was we asked Ms. Fields to review the excerpt in order to select something that she would share with her peers and to sort of talk aloud as she did this. And there were several interesting things going on. So as she's reviewing the lesson, she's continuing to notice students' mathematical thinking. She says, "Ooh, that was a good point. It's just reversed." And another time she says, "Oh, she's thrown off by the setup of the equation," right? These are the kinds of things we talked about also. In addition, she's noticing with an eye towards what she thinks will be interesting for her peers to watch in the video. Right? This is really a different kind of noticing. She says, okay, I'm looking for parts where the thinking is interesting or different or surprising. I want to share the more meatier discussion. So she's almost taking on a different kind of noticing here and thinking about what she wants to show her peers. And in fact, she's comparing her noticing from when she was teaching with her noticing in this review. And she says, I think this part is better than I remembered in the moment of instruction. So there's a lot going on here. Our point is that expanding to teacher self-captured video provides novel opportunities to learn to notice, opportunities that we think are really significant. We think this shifts the decision-making around the use of video so that teachers are at the helm. And it's not that I think there's not going to be any role for researchers and teacher educators, but elevating teachers is very significant. And to me, the question is, in what other ways might we democratize video-based teacher noticing and learning to notice? Now, I have been studying teacher noticing for 30 years, and it has been incredibly gratifying to see how the field has taken up this context. Some folks have expanded ideas in very valuable ways. Others have pushed back on ideas that I've shared, and it's fantastic. I love that. And in fact, Sarah and Jen Richards and I just wrote a paper where essentially we argue that I was completely wrong in how I've initially talked about professional vision. And I think it's incredibly important as researchers that we look back and that we look forward and that we be open to rethinking our own ideas. And today I've tried to highlight some of the key questions that I'm grappling with. And in conclusion, I just want to ask one more question. I've been thinking about last night's plenary, and so I've been wondering, how might AI facilitate the use of video for teacher noticing? I'm of course cautious of our ethical responsibilities and obligations, but imagine that Mrs. Fields has a whole corpus of video from her kindergarten class that she records every day, every moment, every math lesson there is. And she asks ChatGPT to pull out moments where she says, interesting, during instruction. Or maybe she asks generative AI to show her moments where students are talking to each other. This is a very different world of possibilities, I think, for the study of teacher noticing and learning to notice in the future. And I will leave you to that. I do want to say, very exciting news, our mathematics teacher noticing book is now free to anyone. So you can use this QR code, or you can just go online. We've made it open access, and just really excited to share the work with everyone. So thank you.
And now we'll entertain questions.
It's coming.
Two quick questions.
Do you mind introducing yourself?
Yes,
I just love to know who people are.
My name is Bridget Looney, and I'm a teacher educator from Montclair State University.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, so just two related questions. One is, could you just clarify, did you mean it was bad for them to extend the time to slow down and notice more? Like, was that not what they were supposed to do?
No, I thought it was great.
It was great? Okay.
And I just thought it was sort of, in the moment of teaching, they were also paying attention to their noticing, thinking, ooh, I want this conversation to go on more because I'm paying attention to what students are saying. So they were making changes in the moment of instruction. I sort of called it focused noticing. It's like you've got a video, like you've got your noticing head and your teaching head.
All right, so the other question is, what did you mean, how are you using the word democratize in this case?
Oh, I am using it in the way of putting the ability to lead work on teacher noticing in the hands of teachers. Thank you for asking that.
Hello, my name is Qazi Zulkarnain, and I'm from Ohio State University.
Nice to meet you.
My question, so first of all, thank you so much for this insightful session. My question is, while while a couple of exercises and activities were being shared, so the questions that were posed that, what did you notice, or, these were very open-ended questions, which basically kind of apparently made noticing sound as if it does not have boundaries. But my question basically is that can the boundaries of noticing, because I do think that it's limited, everybody has a capacity to what they can notice, but can, for a teacher, let's say, the boundaries or what the teacher wants to notice can vary from lesson to lesson and class to class, saying that, oh, today since I'm delivering this particular thing, maybe I just noticed this. Or tomorrow, and today I will not focus on the content side of things, but maybe more philosophical side of things. Maybe I want my class to be a little bit more equitable, so maybe I'll focus on things which would kind of highlight those things. So can it vary every day and from every lesson for that matter? So I just wanted to know how flexible noticing can be. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. So there has been some work that has looked at how teachers notice in different parts of like a unit, so that teachers are noticing for more seeds of ideas when they're doing an introductory activity in a unit, and you could imagine when it's sort of a more summative activity that they're noticing in different ways. So I think you're absolutely right. Not only can teachers, what they're attending to, be influenced by what it is they're trying to accomplish that day, but it can also be influenced by just the moment in time. When I'm talking about the boundaries of teacher noticing, I mean more that there might be benefits to limiting the components of noticing so that we feel we can dig in theoretically to those moments. I don't mean to restrict the content or the subject of teachers noticing, if that makes sense.
Hello, Vlad Kovic from James Madison University. Thank you very much for the talk, very insightful. You mentioned the use of AI in coding your data, and I find it fascinating. And my question is, to what extent do you think the development of technologies such as virtual reality or extended reality can inform research on teacher noticing regarding methodology or research questions asked?
Very much. Anyway, so let's see, there's been some work probably maybe 15 or 20 years ago on 360 cameras in the classroom, and I think, sometimes we don't take seriously enough the idea that when you record in a classroom, you are inevitably taking a perspective, right? Well, sometimes we like to say, oh, video, it's this neutral thing, it's just capturing the interaction. But not really. In fact, Sherry and Laura and I have done some work where we've thought about, if you videotape from the back of the room versus the front of the room, you see students' faces, you see the back of their heads, it all has a perspective. I think new technologies provide opportunities to record much more expansively, and so we could maybe more easily study what is the impact of different perspectives? What's the impact of having a larger corpus of data? Even just the ability to transcribe is so much easier. I think there's a lot of methodological opportunities. Does that mean we're still not going to be doing, very deep and careful qualitative studies of classrooms? I think we're going to continue to do that, but it might help us. I should just add, my husband's working on a project developing a piece of software called Tactic that does some semantic analysis And so it's very interesting to see, if we say, look at the tone in this classroom, how is it changing over time? Or how is this idea changed over time? It's very easy to do with different kinds of technology.
Hi, Miriam, it's Jer.
Hi, Jer.
So my question is, I think you started by saying that the point of noticing is to gain insight into student thinking. And so my question would be, is there good noticing and better noticing and not as good noticing? And what follows from noticing as opposed to just doing it and generating it?
Such an easy question, thank you. Well, my colleague Sarah Larison, who is here today, in her dissertation is studying the ways in which sometimes when teachers notice together, it is serving to reify deficit discourses, and other times it is pushing against those discourses to more of an asset-based approach to student ideas. Do I want to call that good and less good noticing? I'm not sure, because I think, everyone's on a journey moving forward, and but I do think that we know that when teachers pay attention to students' ideas in meaningful ways, that the opportunities for student learning increases. So I think there are forms of noticing that we collectively want to move towards looking at students' ideas in depth, towards considering the meaning making that students are doing, etc.
Hi, my name is Song Hwan Byun from here. I'm here.
Wait, tell me where you are. Thank you. Hello.
Yeah, I'm from North Carolina State University. I have a question about the video club setting. So I really appreciated you making distinction between the cognitive view versus the noticing in action, right? So, so teachers are noticing as they teach. That's in the action situated in the classroom setting itself. And so now you're bringing teachers in a video club setting. Now you're talking about different setting. And so I think that our goal is that how teachers notice better, if there is any directions toward that in classroom setting. But then now we're talking about noticing that is happening in outside the classroom setting. How do you grapple with that?
Thank you. We have a wonderful research group at Northwestern with students and postdocs and faculty, and so I was practicing this talk, and we were sort of stuck on this issue of the cognitive perspective and a sociocultural perspective on teacher noticing, and really talking about that. And my colleague Jen Munson was sort of chuckled a little bit, and she said, yeah, Miriam, you have a cognitive perspective, but you organize teachers in socially situated groups to develop their noticing. So you must have all along thought there was something valuable in the social organization of learning. And I think she was right. I think that there didn't used to be easy ways for teachers to record themselves. And it was a big lift. How many of you have, recorded in teachers' classrooms, reviewed the video, picked it, it was a lot of work to do that. And it wasn't really that easy. It wasn't really possible for teachers to do. Many times I would have said to teachers, is there anything that stood out in the lesson today that you think we should look at? And they would give input, and I would always check with the teacher to say, we're going to look at this part of the lesson. What do you think of that? And so there were ways to engage teachers. My point is not to say that we should put aside the video clubs, because I really do think they're valuable. But just that, everyone has a video camera now. It's so easy for a teacher to set up an iPad with a student or two to get questions. Just putting it in the hands of the teacher, I didn't realize that there would be really meaningful opportunities for teachers to learn to notice in that. So I'm not so worried about either or. I think it's more of a both and kind of thing. And I think we probably want to focus some attention on the teacher self-captured opportunities so we understand them better. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Teacher captured So let me, sorry, so just follow up with that is that once teachers record their own teaching and they look at the video and reflecting on it, and that's another setting, right? They're not teaching teacher is not teaching at the moment, and interacting with the students and moment by moment interaction. So that's why I'm talking about is that, once the teacher is, recorded moments, and then now we're talking about different setting. Is that still noticing? Because we're defining noticing as in part of the action, but teacher is not making action. The action teacher is doing is watching the video, not teaching.
You're asking, are they doing noticing when they're watching the video?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I think yes. I think that when teachers are watching video, in fact, they are developing their noticing skills in particular ways. And I think that video is especially good at promoting that kind of work because it can sort of promote reflection rather than requiring teachers to take action. When a student says an idea in the classroom, the teacher's like, okay, what are we gonna do? I gotta do something. But with a video, you can literally stop the video and say, wow, what is that student saying? What is the wall? I have absolutely no idea what he's talking about. And what we find is that the capabilities around noticing, the ability to pick out a moment that's really worthy of digging into, and the ways that teachers learn to interpret student thinking in the video club are capabilities that they then bring into the classroom with them. So I would say absolutely, teachers can learn to notice, they can do real noticing when they are reviewing video.
Hi, I'm Dan Hack from Horizon Research in North Carolina. Can you go back to the slide that had the arrow where you were contrasting the cognitive, or maybe not contrasting, but relating cognitive and social?
I was afraid someone might ask about that, but I thought it was going to be Lonnie, so this is better, Dan.
I was thinking about the words in that second box of noticing is something the teacher and the class do together, and this is what it got me thinking about. And I wonder if this is related to your idea of shaping, so maybe you can help me with that. And I don't want to get too meta here, but I am convinced that students notice what their teachers notice. And there are things that students want to be noticed for, and there are things that they don't want to be noticed for. And I wonder if that's the teacher and the class doing something together to actually create what gets disclosed or made evident to be noticed in the first place, and that shifting over time in this relationship. Or is that part of what shaping is? Because what I heard you say seemed to suggest shaping being largely a part of the teacher's work, but I think a lot is probably shaped in this box of doing things together.
Thanks, Dan. I had not considered the student's role in shaping, and I think that's a really good point. I don't know about you, but I have a whole list of studies I want to do, and one is asking students what they notice and what stands out to them at the same time as we ask teachers, and sort of mapping those. Same with a student teacher and experienced teacher. How does the noticing develop over time? But I think that's a really good point. I'm sure students are noticing what's happening in significant ways, and it's impacting their learning, for sure. I'd have to think about how it relates to shaping, but I think that's a really interesting idea. Thank you.
Did you realize anything that the teacher refusing the noticing? Did you realize some of the areas they refuse or they don't want to notice?
Well, when we usually have a video club with teachers, and if we sort of leave it pretty open, the teachers, in my experience, almost inevitably look at the teacher in the video. And that makes sense to me because they are teachers. And so they are very concerned with what they should be doing and the impact of their questions and their actions or their non-actions and things like that. So I often get resistance from teachers when I encourage them to look instead at the students. And that is the first big shift. For me to, convince is probably the wrong word, but for me to share with teachers that by looking at what their students are doing, that's how they're going to improve opportunities for learning. They don't always believe that initially. One of the things that I think is great is that when I explain to teachers that we're not going to look at video, we're not going to be looking at them in the video, that often makes them more willing to be videotaped. In fact, I say you don't even have to be in the video at all. So it's sort of a tension, I would say. We have one last.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan. I'm a doctoral student in Indiana University. And my question is regarding the boundaries that you were defining in teaching noticing. And it seems that the shaping part kind of opened it is the piece that is not closing the limit. And the list that you showed there, with example of the wall, for instance, when the teacher is going further in the questioning, to what extent that second order or third order questioning is also, or could be a limit for this noticing, right? Because when the student was showing the answer, the 5 + 2 = 7 or something, maybe that was an action that the teacher did for the other students teaching, notice what the other student was thinking. So maybe that was not an action with the purpose of the teacher noticing that. So I saw that could be a limit. But you described that the shaping is also the construction of the interactions, but the teacher is noticing. So maybe the question is if you can tell more about a specific or how this boundary in that part can be characterized and what are the problems there that seems to be the difference between noticing and then going to other actions like selecting or making the students do something that is not noticing. Thank you.
I think that's exactly right? There's a lot of reasons why maybe the teacher said, tell me about the wall, right? One interpretation is that the teacher wants to know more about the student's idea, right? One idea is that she is shaping the conversation so she has more information that she can notice. Another is she wants to elevate it for the class, just like you were suggesting, right? So, hey, tell me about the wall. Hey everybody, what's Mason mean about the wall? I agree with you, there are multiple interpretations. And